In Adobe Camera Raw in Photoshop CS3, you can now process your Camera Raw files, also JPEG and TIFF files, which I think is utterly fantastic. In this video, I'd like to give you an overview of the most powerful features in Camera Raw. The first thing that I always start with is I always start by adjusting my white balance. I'm going to click on the white balance tool, and I like clicking on something that should be neutral. So if I click on the side of this building, you saw that image just ever so slightly. Now you can try other neutral areas. Neutral area is an area that does not have any color in it to see how you can adjust that image. And it's very subjective on an image like this, which is not a product shot. If you like that white balance, you can keep going. You can also adjust the white balance by adjusting the sliders to cool down an image, move the slider to the left, to warm it up, which looks rather good, move the slider to the right. The tint slider works in a 3D space, allowing you to adjust the colors from green to magenta. I always work in Camera Raw from top to bottom and from left to right with these additional palettes. Also, you can see what Adobe thinks the image would look like by clicking on Auto. That's a auto setting. I think that's a little bright. You click on Default, the image goes back to the way you shot it. Many times, I'll click on Auto and then adjust the part of the correction to my desired taste. So I think the Auto did a good job, except for the exposure, it was too bright. So you can bounce back and forth between Auto and Default very, very quickly. The exposure is your overall tonality. The recovery is a fantastic tool. I'm going to zoom in on these rooftops here in the background. You notice the red? This is showing me that the highlights are being clipped. By increasing the recovery, this is really for the highlight recovery. Notice how that red clipping disappears. What Camera Raw is doing is it's actually rebuilding information in the highlights. I'm going to move this to the left. If on your image you don't see the red clipping, you can turn the clipping off in the upper right-hand corner by clicking on the highlight clipping. It disappears. The highlights are still clipped. I'm going to turn it back on. I find that very useful. The shadow clipping is shown with dark blue. I'm going to up the recovery. And I'm going to zoom out. You can zoom out with the minus key in the lower left, or use the Photoshop command keys, Command minus, Command Control plus, of course. The fill light I address in another video will open up the midtones ever so slightly. Your blacks, I like holding on the Option Alt key, and it will literally show you where that first black is serving as a visual foundation for your image. So find the first black, then I back off just ever so slightly. Brightness is responsible for your midtones, and the contrast, by moving the contrast slider to the right, you increase the steepness of the S curve. By moving it to the left, you flatten the image out. Now, one of the greatest new features in Camera Raw is the retouching tool. I'm going to zoom in on this just like I would in Photoshop. And the retouching tool, don't think of this as like a portrait retouching tool. Think of this as a cleanup tool. And on digital camera sensors, many times you'll have dust. If you change the lens out in the open, dust adheres to the sensor, and then every single picture you take will have the exact same mark. Well, you can use the retouching tool either as a healing tool or as a cloning tool. I like using it as a healing tool. Start out by dragging over the dust that you want to get rid of, and then notice you get a green source that you can actually move into position, and that dust is gone. I'm going to put this source here. And look how quickly I'm actually cleaning up this image. I actually want this source to be taken from there. And those 3 dust marks are gone. If you want to hide the circles, simply click Show Overlay, which turns it off, and then you can see where you've already cleaned up. This is a true lifesaver because I can take care of all the dust without having to go into Photoshop. Continuing, when you want to delve deeper into Camera Raw, you would work with your curves, sharpening, and don't forget to look at the HSL, Hue, Saturation, Lightness, Grayscale command. This is very, very exciting. I'm going to click on Convert to Grayscale, and then similar to the black and white command in Photoshop, If I wanted to make what was blue, in this case the sky, darker, I'm going to take my blue slider and move it to the left. And it's interesting that there's subjective colors also. The aquas and the purples are more of a subjective color. I can brighten up the yellows and really have that be a very dramatic image. Once you've converted an image to grayscale, I think you'll want to experiment with the split toning. And I like warming my highlights and cooling the shadows. If you move the hue slider, you won't really see any change. The trick is hold down the Option Alt key to find the color that you like, release the Option Alt key, and then move the saturation up. Look, there's a very subtle sepia tone now in that image, and I'm going to do the same thing in the shadows. Option Alt, don't worry, it's always very, very strong at first. Go into those dark blues, and then just a hint of saturation, and you can create an old, antique-looking image. By adjusting the balance, I could say, make it bluer, go more to the highlights, make it yellower. This is a tremendous creative tool. And of course, when you're working with Adobe Camera Raw, none of the changes are applied to your file, so you can experiment over and over again. To maintain even greater flexibility, select Open Object. And what this will do will take the Camera Raw file and instantly turn it into a smart object that you can use with smart filters and continue working non-destructively in Photoshop CS3.